This will be the last part of this chapter 1, section 3. We're finding distance. You remember last video, we talked about the distance formula. That formula will tell you how far 2 points are from each other in a coordinate plane. So we're going to use this, and we're going to take our time. We're going to do 2 problems together, and we're going to find the distance between points. Okay, so this is that number 7 that we worked on and we graphed, but we couldn't find the distance because we didn't use the distance formula. Okay, so I'm going to put the distance formula up top here. And I'm going to use a lowercase d for distance, which is acceptable. I'll show you a better way in a second. To find the distance between 2 points, we're going to take the square root of a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to subtract our x values. Since there's 2 of them, I'm going to distinguish between the 2. I'm going to call one of them x sub 2 and the other one x sub 1. Now, you also need to subtract your y values. And you have to do it in the same order that you did the x's in. So y sub 2 minus y sub 1 is what that formula says. Now, if you wanted to switch these 2 x's and do x1 minus x2, you could. But then over here, you got to do y1 minus y2. It'll give you the same answer. Because when you subtract something and square it, it's going to give you the same exact number. You're going to add those 2 together, then take the square root. That's the formula. Okay, so that lowercase d stands for distance. And it's kind of like a generic letter to use. If we're trying to find the distance from A to B, I would much rather use a capital A and a capital B right next to it. When you see this, remember it's red, distance from A to B. We're going to put that big radical in here. I'm going to put these parentheses in for some structure with my squared. I got a plus sign here. Put your x's in, put your y's in, subtract them, square them, subtract them, square them, add them, take the square root. That's the idea. Since I have my red pen out, I'm going to make my y values red. I'm going to make my x values blue. Okay, formula says take the x's and subtract them. It doesn't matter what order you go in to start with. So if you want to, put the -5 first. If you put the -3 first, you're not wrong. Now on the other side, maybe I should have used a different color for the y since I already have red going. Now let's see what green looks like. Okay, let's say the y values are green now. My first x value was -5, so my first y value has to be the y value that came from that ordered pair that the -5 was in. So I got to put a 2 in here. Then put my -1. Now this might look really, really complicated to you, but trust me, it's really simple as long as you take it step by step. So I'm going to show you how to do it by hand. You're going to subtract the x's. -5 minus 3. If you're not sure what it is, type it in your calculator. It's going to give you a -8. Oh, it's a parenthesis. And you need to square that. Over here, we have a 2, which is a +2, and we're going to subtract a -1. Really be careful there. Again, if you're not sure, type it in. But when you subtract a negative, it's like adding a positive. 2 minus -1 is 3. And I could put parentheses around that 3 if I want. I'm squaring it, but I don't need to. So I'm just simplifying step by step. What is -8 squared? Notice how the -8 is in parentheses. So this is read as -8 times -8. It gives you 64. 3 squared is 9. I think you know what 64 plus 9 is. This might look a little weird to you, but your answer is the square root of 73. Now, what in the world is that number? Well, I've got a pretty good idea. It's definitely bigger than 8. And I know this because I know the square root of 64 is 8. But I know it's not quite 9 because I know that the square root of 81 is 9, if that makes any sense. 73 is a little bit closer to 81 than it was to 64. So I think it's bigger than 8.5. So it's going to be 8.5 something. Okay. You can type this into your calculator at this point. The square root sign, if you're using a Texas Instruments TI-83 or TI-85, whatever you're using, if you hit the second button and then the x squared button, that is the 5th button down on the left, that'll pull up your radical. And if you type it in, square root of 73 ends up being 8.5, we'll call it 4. We're going to round to 2 decimal places. So if you have this typed in your calculator, your answer reads 8.5440033745. I'm keeping it as 54 because the digit after the 54 is not bigger than 5. That's the exact distance. Well, this is the exact distance between these 2 points. This is the rounded distance. Number 8, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find the distance from point C to point D. Maybe I'll use a different color. Let's see what that green looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to fill in my formula. Change my color. I'll keep my X's as blue. I'll make my Y's red. Then I'm just going to fill them in. Since my pen's already red, I'll subtract my Y's. Your Y's go over here. In whatever order you want to subtract them in is totally up to you, because the distance from point C to point D is the same as the distance from point D to point C. So maybe I'll just do 7 minus 4, because I think that's probably easier for you to do in your head than 4 minus 7. Now, since I did 7 minus 4, when I go over to do my x's, I need to pick this x that came from the ordered pair where that first y came from. So I need to do -6 minus 0. Again, it's just a bunch of operations. We're going to subtract 2 numbers twice. We're going to square those numbers, then we're going to add them and take the square root. We can all do this. I know it looks complicated, but it really isn't. -6 minus 0 is -6. And you need to square that number. 7 minus 4 we know is 3. It's a positive 3, so I don't need to put the parentheses on there because I don't have a negative. We're going to take the square root of that after we simplify a little bit. -6 squared. Notice how the -6 is in parentheses. So that's the number -6 squared. -6 times -6 is 36. It's positive. 3 squared is 9. 36 plus 9 gives you 45. That's what we call our radicand. That's the number under the radical. Square root of 45, that's the exact distance between point C and point D. Now, if you don't have a calculator with you, hopefully you can get one at some point, how are you going to figure out what the square root of 45 is? Well, I know it's really, really close to 7. And the reason I'm saying that is the square root of 49, I know the square root of 49 is 7. Oh, I just put a radical there. I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to call this like, it's probably going to be like 6.8. I'm going to type it into my calculator sitting here. But again, to pull up that radical, hit the second button and the 5th button down on the left. The square root of 45 is, I said 6.8. It's actually 6.71, we'll call it. So the number reads 6.708203932. I'm looking at the first 2 digits after that decimal. Right now it's 70. But I'm going to round it up to 71 because the 3rd digit is bigger than 5. Okay, so that's how you use your distance formula. Your assignment after this lesson is going to be obviously to use that distance formula to find the lengths of these segments. So make sure you're practicing. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask.